What is next? A trade truce, or are we heading for another round of economic fisticuffs? This game of tariff tag is far from over. But let's get a grip on the cause and effects of the heightened tariff wars as they are playing out. Dr. Vivek Mishra is joining us, Deputy Director at the Strategic Studies Program with ORF, and independent emerging markets commentator Jeff Dennis. Good evening, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Vivek Mishra, Trump reigniting the tariff war, hitting Canada, Mexico and China, fresh duties there. Does this seem like a pure economic move, or is there a deeper shift in U.S. global trade strategy?
Hi. Yeah, I mean, definitely a deeper shift here. If I were to choose between those two components, if you look at the tariff strategy of the United States, it's basically strategized or planned in a way to cause deeper shift, to cause actually, in the longer term, a new alignment of countries even. If you look at Trump's statements about its relationship with, carving out relationship with newer countries like Javier Milei in Argentina, where he has actually where he's said that he's open to signing an FTA, a free trade agreement. There's no other country that Trump has talked about signing an FTA with. So I think it's groundbreaking in many ways. There is a new arc of countries that out of this. And so yes, China definitely, because of the dependence between US and China, this is obviously a long game which will unravel in the next few years. But needless to say that the Canada, Mexico and China bit, which is actually responsible for 1/3 of everything that gets into the United States from these three countries, from the overall imports, yes, I think it's consequential.
Indeed, and with all of this playing out, markets are playing into uncertainty, and that's what the markets hate, Jeff. This tariff escalation has thrown another wrench into global trade. The dollar has gone falling to a 3-month low, but how do you see investors reacting now? The global funds are fleeing emerging markets like India. Tell us about that and the potential fallout for businesses that are caught in this crossfire.
That we came into the Trump presidency thinking that it was all predictable. He would cut taxes, he would raise tariffs, he'd do it quickly, they'd be quite big, and this would lead to a lot of certainty about what was going on. Now what we've got is will he, won't he, who's going to get hit, how high are the tariffs going to be, etc., etc. And this is leading to, as you said already, massive uncertainty. And this, and I think it's the most important thing going on, frankly, right now, apart from the trade war itself, it's leading to a significant deterioration of the U.S. economic outlook. You may very well have reported already that the Atlanta Fed's nowcast model calls for minus 2.8% GDP growth annualized in Q1. So I think what we have to throw into this as well is the impact of all this unpredictable policy on the U.S. economy. And this is also what's contributing to a lower dollar and, of course, lower bond yields as people leave equities and move towards fixed income. Now, although classically, as I've always argued, a stronger dollar is bad for EM and a weaker dollar is good for EM, this is still not a great environment for emerging markets simply because you've got so much uncertainty about the global economy and the U.S. economy, which is going with a lower dollar. So I don't think in this environment EM is going to do particularly well, yes, which has been my view all year, frankly. But it's the unpredictability of this, the uncertainty, yes, that I think is really doing the damage.
Well, the Chinese side has responded, Vivek Mishra, and the response was pretty swift. Retaliatory tariffs, of course, and then there is this WTO violation accusation against the U.S. Do you think Beijing is simply making noise, or could that lead to a longer, more serious diplomatic/economic standoff?
I think if I were to guess, the latter, because this time, if you look at the strategy that China has adopted, it's not just a retaliatory policy, but actually a preemptive one. So if you look at the bans, the steps that China has taken, particularly in terms of targeting countries, targeting companies that in the United States that go beyond the spectrum of just tit for tat, I think it's particularly a company called Illumina, which is known for gene mapping production of equipment, which helps in gene mapping. I think those are sectors which China is critically targeting to message the United States that it is willing to go beyond the spectrum that the United States chooses. And I think that's important. On your second point, I think institutionally, the WTO is not going to serve much purpose, because the commitment of the United States to institutional liberal world order is well known, and it's only under Trump 2.0 it's going to get further fractured. So
Right.
how it is challenged at that level and whether that's contested remains a wild card.
It's very interesting that China has gone after American agriculture and meat exports, the same industries that took a big hit in previous trade wars. Now we've seen the latest drop as far as Trump's statements go on Truth Social. He's criticizing Canada, and Canada doesn't allow American banks to do business in Canada, is what Trump is saying. But he says their banks flood the American market. Or that seems fair to me, doesn't it? He says with utmost sarcasm, and that's typical Trump style. And this even as the Trump trade war is escalating. The Dow has dropped 500 points. The Nasdaq is flirting with correction territory. We are seeing the lowest that the Nasdaq has been since the 5th of November. The S&P falling 1% to its lowest since the 13th of Jan. This is a gap open on Wall Street, and the fear gauge has spiked. The stocks, several under pressure because of the tariff impact on Wall Street. Look at General Motors, Ford, Chipotle, Stellantis, Tesla, all of them facing the heat as of now. But looking at the latest statement coming through, let's connect with our guests. Emerging markets expert Jeff is with us, along with Vivek Mishra of ORF. Do tell us, Mr. Mishra, how do you see this really? Because it's going beyond tariff wars. What now Trump is saying to Canada about the banking system, as it were.
Yeah, it's definitely wider than just tariffs. I think there is if you look at Trump's signaling, where he is consistently called Canada as a 51st state and Trudeau as the governor. I think there is a larger signaling. Obviously, it doesn't mean that Canada will become a part of the US, but it's certainly that Trump wants Canada to bow to some of these pressures that the US, because US has pitched Canada as a country which has unilaterally taken advantage of the United States. Because remember, around 70% of all exports from Canada goes to the US,
yes,
roughly. So I think with that kind of dependence, there is a clear signaling in terms of what Trump wants. But eventually, if Trump's pressure goes on to build in this fashion that it has, I think countries like Mexico, Canada,
yes,
and others could come together in the North American continent.
So I'll talk about that in just a moment. But Jeff, this kind of impact that we would see on banking stocks, you see deeper impacts coming through when Trump says these things beyond the tariff wars even?
I mean, I doubt it, frankly. I mean, I think what he's saying is probably true. It's just not very relevant, frankly, because obviously a lot of Canadian banks have put a lot of investment into the US. They've employed people, they've supported the economy through the banking investment. So I doubt this is going to be the major focus. I still think it's going to be primarily on things such as, export advantages and the existence of tariffs in other countries, which the US is trying to match, if you like, now.
Correct.
So I don't think the banking sector is going to be the main focus here. I think it's going to be much more the general tariff situation, frankly.
Correct. No, it just adds to the uncertainty that the markets don't like. But Mr. Mishra, I was wondering how China is going after American agriculture and meat exports, the same industries that have taken a big hit in previous trade wars. Is that a smart move, you think? Will it hit U.S. exporters hard, or do you think it could force Washington even to go back to the negotiating table?
So I think the sectors that China has targeted will clearly hit American farm, etc., agriculture sector, and which is why you see Trump tweeting at farmers of the United States, let's produce more and have fun, quote unquote.
Yes.
Now, all of that recalibration will certainly take a lot of time. So in the immediate term, there's estimation of inflation to losses in revenue.
Sure.
How the U.S. actually readjusts to that remains to be seen, but I don't see a Trump administration going to the negotiating table without advantage with China.
Jeff, what's your thought about emerging markets now? Do they stand to gain with all that's playing out? Could we see new supply chain shifts like we did in the last U.S. China trade war? Countries like India and Vietnam, Mexico even benefiting?
Yes, to a certain extent. I think that's probably true. But I think we have to bear in mind that Mexico has a huge trade surplus with the U.S. In fact, the second biggest, as far as some recent data that the Financial Times in the UK published. And Vietnam is number 3, and India is, I think, number 10 at this point. So
Yes.
I think the danger is going to be that any country that has a sizable surplus with the U.S. in principle could be targeted at some point by the U.S. in terms of tariffs. And so, in fact, and I've just noticed this myself now as I looked at the data, is that the 4 biggest markets in the EM index, Taiwan, Korea, China, and India, all are in the top 10 of surpluses, trade surpluses with the U.S.
Right.
And so it's just inconceivable to me that in this situation, especially as I think the risk of U.S. recession is growing by the day,
Yes.
I just don't see how emerging markets are going to be able to hold up here. And as I've often said on your network, I think in this environment, India is one of the more defensive places to be in what is going to be a very challenging environment. So I'm very, very cautious about EM here.
But even talking about China, Mr. Mishra, it has been working on diversifying its trade partners and supply chains since that last tariff war. Do you think China is in a better position, a stronger position now to absorb these new tariffs, or is this going to hit them hard?
So I think, both could happen. If you look at one of the finest example here would be what China has done in terms of the semiconductor and the AI industry. When the Biden administration ramped up the pressure on China, China actually asked each of its country, and Xi Jinping led with that narrative that China should look internally and work across spectrum to boost its capacities. I think it's going to be a similar call on trade as well. I don't think China will look externally, but give a call internally to sort of boost capacities.
But if you look at them, Canada, Mexico, China, all of them have this pushback, and it's strong against these American tariffs. Do you see new trade alliances forming in response, like you were suggesting, potentially even isolating the U.S. on the global stage? Could that also happen, maybe not immediately in the near future?
I think the grounds were already being laid by China. If you look at the Shanghai port in Latin America, which is one of the largest ports, opened just months before Trump inauguration. I think there's a clear strategy. China opening up to other larger economies. For example, in October, India and China worked a thaw. So China is basically was laying grounds for a soft landing and the Trump coming in. So I think there was a clear for them laid out, which now they're playing out.
Well, I'm looking at the markets right now, and 1.5 percentage point cut on the Dow. The Nasdaq, the S&P, all of them are seeing deep patches of red. This is indicative of the kind of pressure that the markets are facing because of these tariff tremors that are really playing out. And Jeff, we'll be connecting with you to find out exactly what happens next, because we need to understand, with so much volatility, how exactly are the markets going to move. This latest round of tariffs isn't just about trade, it's about power, it's about alliances and global economic influence. America is flexing its muscles. China is, of course, hitting back. Even the North American allies are feeling the squeeze, and we've seen that play out across the European bourses. But whether this strategy strengthens America's position or backfires spectacularly, that remains to be seen. Thank you, Vivek Mishra, Jeff Dennis, for your sharp analysis. We'll be tracking how this trade war 2.0 unfolds, because in global economics, the real consequences, they show up where you least expect them. But we'll be tracking. Thanks very much for joining us on India Tonight.